deep three. A one-hand slam. Finger rolls it up and in. He checked. Fire! That was just sick. Listen to the crowd roar for Klay Thompson.
4 years ago tonight, Klay Thompson set an NBA record with 37 points in a quarter. The third quarter, to be exact, in a Warriors win over Sacramento. He was 13 of 13 for the quarter, 9 of 9 from three-point range. He had a couple of free throws without missing as well. Perfect quarter for Klay Thompson, who only had 52 that night and asked out of the game with like 9 minutes left because they were up by 30. So that made us wonder, who are the greatest streak shooters of all time? Thompson's got to be on that list, but
yes,
for you guys, who are the greatest streak shooters you've seen?
Man, that's a great question. A guy that automatically comes to mind for me is Gilbert Arenas. He had some moments where he would light it up, and I mean, he would go at the other best players in the league. I mean, I'll never forget he and Kobe, you know, him taking that challenge to fill it up in Kobe's face one night. But Arenas was, to me, ahead of his time, GA, when you think about a volume three-point shooter before the volume shooting three-point era. He got labeled a gunner, but he was an awesome scorer and an unbelievable streak shooter, guy that could get hot and absolutely blow the roof off the building.
Agent Zero.
Agent Zero. Oh, gosh, I miss some of his crazy exploits. It was good stuff.
There was a lot of crazy there.
Oh,
it was fun for the most part.
And really, it's hard to say who's the greatest because all those guys.
Sure.
I mean, we had some other guys that we were talking about. Ricky Pierce, Dale Ellis. These are guys that were just lights-out shooters. The Rifleman, Chuck Person.
Yep.
But for me, one of the guys that stood out for me personally was Mahmoud Rauf. I mean, a.k.a. Chris Jackson, back when we played against each other in college. I mean, he, off the dribble, shot the basketball as well as anybody I had ever played against. I mean, his crossover and ability to freeze you and pull. Now, he wasn't a guy that shot it with the range of some of those guys, but in part, I think, because that was the era. You know, you saw more of the great shooters, the Hornaceks, the Jeff Malones. Those guys were mid-range shooters more so than the long three-point shooters that we see today. But, man, they could get it going. And again, once they get in that zone, it didn't matter how good you defended them. If they could get it off, it was more than likely going in.
Somebody came up with Chuck Person.
The Rifleman.
No doubt.
I just thought of Rashawn Leonard.
Yeah.
He could get it going.
And do guys like Ray Allen and Reggie Miller count?
They were just really good shooters.
I mean, they were great shooters,
but see, that my thing was these guys were all like, none of these guys are streak shooters.
Right.
Now, the difference is they're always great shooters. Their streaks just go to another level. I mean, it's not fair to call them streak. They were great shooters.
Yeah, I think
there's no doubt about it.
But you know what it
Yeah, it is. Like, because you always say, oh, he's streaky. Well, that means he's inconsistent. No, these guys were, just like Klay is not an inconsistent shooter.
Right.
He just has those stretches where he does, like what he did. We'd never seen anybody make 10 consecutive threes in an actual game.
Right.
You know, before.
Just the other night,
And so he's done things like that just take it to a whole nother level. But these are some guys in that era, you felt the same way about them that you feel about the great shooters today. They just shoot with more range today. And I think they shoot it in different ways that you didn't get back in those eras. And again, all great shooters, though. But today, what you're seeing with Steph and Klay in particular and James Harden, I mean, we didn't see guys. First of all, when you shot a three in our era, your toes, they had to check to see if you were touching the line every time you shot because everybody was going forward. Nobody ever went away from the three-point line to get threes off the way you see guys doing that. It's incredible the range that these guys have, the confidence that they play with. I'd never seen it. Steph Curry and Klay, for me, where they shoot shots from, where they shoot from. I remember one time, remember when Steph hit those shots against OKC a couple seasons ago?
Yeah, pull up.
We did a demonstration here on the floor, and we put the marks down where he shot those shots. And I remember standing on one of them. It was about 38 feet from the basket, and I was saying to myself, damn, would I throw this to get it there? Because I couldn't shoot this as a shot to get it there because most shots from that distance were heaves. These guys shoot them with rhythm. It's incredible.
And there's a whole generation of kids growing up with that as a part of their game, which, for better or worse, there's a great debate about whether or not this is good for basketball.
Yeah.
But now it's commonplace. You got guys taking shots from those distances at the NBA level and all the way down. So it's going to be interesting to see what kind of shooters develop in these next couple of generations following the lead of guys like Klay and Steph.
You know, the indigenous people in Alaska have 1,000 different words for snow, I think it is. There should be like at least 100 different words for Klay Thompson hot.
Yeah.
Like different varieties of Klay Thompson
Whatever
hot.
it is,
He needs his own emoji.
Yes.
That's what it is.
All right, more to get to here. Checking in on the Pacers. Take a look at Joel Embiid and try to assess whether you think he's going to play tonight against the San Antonio Spurs. He's been great when he's been out there. 20 or more points in 16 straight games.
He was spectacular against the Rockets the other day.
20 times, 30 and 10 this season for Embiid.
So,
Ben Simmons is going to play
saying
tonight.
he's pretty good.
I'm saying he's really good. He's just unsure tonight about his availability. Simmons will play. He's dealing with an illness, but he's going to go. And Jimmy Butler will sit out again because of that sore wrist. They take on the San Antonio Spurs, who come in having lost 3 of their last 5. They blew out the Sixers in their first meeting back in San Antonio. What a little more than halfway through the season, what have you seen about the Sixers that you like? What questions would you still like answered?
Well, I mean, look, I think there's still a team that's doesn't shoot it as well from the perimeter as you'd like if you're talking about them being a contender. But Joel Embiid is so good. He was so good against Houston the other day. If you could take a player and ride him in his game through the playoffs, they've got one of the handful of guys to me in the league that if Embiid gets in that bag and really starts playing at a high level in the postseason, I don't know how you'd stop him. I don't know what another team would do to take him away completely to prevent him from being effective.
No doubt about it, other than go look at the blueprint that the Boston Celtics put forth last year. Like, what gets lost in all of this sometimes is because these young, incredibly talented players show us their ceiling, we forget how important experience is in the postseason.
Sure.
And when you play in a regular season, I don't game plan. We just kind of talk about what we want to try and do against you, but we don't drill it. We don't have tendencies. We don't have a book on you, and we're not on the same schedule. When you get in the postseason now, I get an opportunity. I remember playing for Pat Riley my rookie year. After the season, we're getting ready for the playoffs, and the assistant coach brought me a book. And I was like, damn, I didn't know what it was a book of every player, every play they ran that season, every play. So everything they had ever done on that court. So you knew every tendency.
Right.
You knew what they'd go to when things got tight. You knew the plays they were going to run. And so that's why I always say in the postseason, that's why you need great players in the postseason, because great players can score against great defense consistently. And great talents can score, but they need the experience. Now, last year will help him and Ben Simmons because, it showed them as much as we thought and were ready to anoint, they weren't quite ready.
No, end of the game execution was terrible.
It was not very good.
And also couldn't get loose the way they needed.
And the pressure of the moment.
That's when they had more shooters.
Yeah, and it was also the pressure of the moment. Because what happens is they'd never been in those situations before, ever.
Right.
They'd never, in their careers, they'd never been in situations where they felt a little unsure, where they weren't, comfortable with who they were as a player at that level, because they'd never had anybody be able to make them do things they didn't want to do. And so that's why that postseason, that experience will help them. But their growth, I think, is coming. The question for me, big picture, is, okay, is the depth going to be there? Because as good as those guys are, you're still going to have guys coming off your bench that can give you quality minutes, that can make big plays. And that's where those veteran guys. Last year, to Sekou's point, they had a better overall roster, even though this one has more top-level talent than they did. To have the Bellinellis and guys like that, and Ilyasova.
And who they got for nothing.
Yeah, those veteran guys that you can trust in big moments to make plays. Not having those guys is a concern.
They'll see Bellinelli tonight for San Antonio. By the way, Joel Embiid will play, we are now told.
Oh, good.
For the
good.
76ers.
I got my league pass already set up.
Because the end of the game execution was a serious issue for them against the Celtics. How much of a difference will Butler make in that he's likely to have the ball in his hands a lot in those late game situations?
It will make it. And listen, in all fairness, Brett Brown's got to take some responsibility too. I remember you and I were working during the regular season last year, and we had a couple times in the game situations where I didn't know what the hell they had tried to draw up and run. It was so, as much as we want to put it on the players, Brett Brown and his staff have to take some responsibility. I don't think they handle end of games. That Celtic game where his team was imploding in the second quarter last year in the postseason, in the game they were up big, he didn't call a timeout. He just basically let it go, and they ended up losing that game in the second quarter, if I'm not mistaken. And again, he's got to be able to help that young group with his ability to give them stuff that they feel confident in when they have to go out and execute.
Let me interrupt for just a second because Victor Oladipo apparently has said this could be a horrible blow for the Pacers and for certainly for their post. Not that they're likely to fall out of the postseason, but for what damage they could do in the postseason if they stick around.
Well, and you have no idea what the injury is until you know the severity of it.
Right.
But you talk about a team that really held the line when he was out. But that was asking him to do it knowing he was on his way back at some point. If you're talking about over the course of the rest of the season and into the postseason, I don't even know where you begin to think about replacing that kind of player, impact player on that Pacers team. They don't have anybody else on the roster like Victor Oladipo.
Right.
They can do all the different things that he does in leading that team.
And one of the best guys in our league. I mean, you hate to see it happen to any of the guys, but he is one that we've all become really fond of. You look about his journey and what he's had to go through to get to this point and to have this happen. The other thing it makes me think of, we had a conversation earlier with the Grizzlies. You know, does something like this trigger a decision for you to go out and make a move now to try to, you know, because the thing about an injury like that, the other thing that's really valuable is the opportunity for all those other guys to be on a team that has an expectation of winning. So that's the advantage for a Sabonis and Miles Turner, your young studs. Every night they take the floor, they're playing to win basketball games, not to prove how good they are.
Right.
Like some young teams are. And so if he's not able to come back, that does, to Sekou's point, like it's one thing to play when you know a guy's coming back. If potentially he's not coming back and you hit a rut where things aren't going well and you don't have that guy to fall back on, that could create a bit of a dilemma from an organizational standpoint.
Well, not to get ahead of ourselves, because again, we don't know what the is at this point, but it could mean more responsibility for Darren Collison, for Tyreek Evans, who's handled the ball a ton and over his career, and for Corey Joseph. But you would think if they have playoff aspirations, that probably means they're looking for somebody if he's out for any lengthy period of time.
Yeah, the trade deadline comes at an opportune time when something like this goes down. But again, I don't want to overdo it until we know what the injury is. But I will say this. When you have an Eastern Conference where Oladipo is one of those players who steps up on the pecking order in the East when LeBron goes, you know, to the Lakers, now you're talking about replacing a guy who, maybe is one of the 6 or 7 best players in the East potentially? He's got to be on your short list of guys who would be in that mix. That is a tall task in terms of even finding somebody on the trade market even that could do the things for you on the fly that Victor Oladipo has done for you the last year and a half. You know, that you're not just replacing an all-star, you're replacing a guy who has quickly become the face and one of the foundations of that franchise.
Well, I'll try to get you updated when we hear something on the status of Victor Oladipo, who has been taken off the floor on a stretcher tonight in Indiana as the Pacers take on the Toronto Raptors. We'll pass along any updates we get as we continue here on Game Time Live.